September 16, 1944. The tropical sun had barely risen over the dense jungles of the Pacific when a young American officer finished cleaning a rifle that many of his fellow soldiers considered little more than an expensive hunting toy. Around him, Marines and soldiers inspected their standard-issue M1 Garand rifles. They joked, compared stories, checked ammunition. And every so often, someone glanced toward Lieutenant John George and smiled. Not because they doubted his courage. No one questioned that. They laughed because of the rifle resting across his knees. Unlike the rifles issued by the Army, George carried a sleek Winchester Model 70. It hadn't come from a military depot. It hadn't been stamped with government property markings. He had ordered it himself before deploying overseas. Through the mail. One soldier jokingly called it a mail-order deer rifle. Another asked if George expected to hunt rabbits instead of Japanese soldiers. The nickname spread quickly. The mail-order rifle. No one imagined that within a few days those same men would stop laughing. Some would begin asking if they could borrow it. Others would simply watch in disbelief as its owner accomplished something few soldiers ever witnessed. Because hidden inside the jungle waited some of the most dangerous marksmen the Imperial Japanese Army had ever trained. And they were already hunting Americans. The Pacific War differed dramatically from the fighting in Europe. Battles rarely unfolded across open fields. Instead, they disappeared beneath dense jungle canopies, where visibility often measured only a few yards. Enemy soldiers hid inside enormous banyan trees, camouflaged themselves beneath tangled roots, built sniper nests high in palm trees, or disappeared into caves overlooking narrow jungle trails. An American soldier might march for hours without seeing a single enemy. Then suddenly, a single rifle shot echoed through the trees. One man fell. No one knew where the bullet had come from. Japanese snipers had perfected patience into an art form. Some remained hidden for entire days without firing. They ignored tempting opportunities. They waited only for officers, machine gunners, radio operators, medics, the men whose deaths could create the greatest confusion. Entire platoons sometimes halted for hours because one invisible sniper refused to reveal his position. The psychological effect proved almost as devastating as the casualties themselves. Every shadow became suspicious. Every branch looked like a rifle barrel. Every tree seemed capable of hiding death. John George understood that kind of warfare better than most. Long before arriving in combat, he had developed an obsession with marksmanship. He believed one accurate shot accomplished more than dozens fired wildly. His personal rifle reflected that philosophy. Unlike the standard Garand, the Winchester Model 70 offered extraordinary precision. It featured a smooth bolt action, a carefully manufactured barrel, excellent balance, and accuracy that civilian hunters already admired across America. Its disadvantages were obvious. It held fewer rounds. It required manual cycling after every shot. It lacked the rapid fire of the Garand. Most Army officers considered it unsuitable for modern combat. George disagreed. He wasn't looking for rapid fire. He was looking for certainty. One shot. One hit. The jungle rewarded precision far more than volume. His fellow soldiers remained skeptical until the shooting started. That morning, the patrol advanced cautiously through thick vegetation. Humidity soaked every uniform within minutes. The smell of wet earth mixed with diesel fuel from distant vehicles. Birds occasionally broke the silence. Otherwise, the jungle remained strangely quiet. Experienced soldiers disliked quiet jungles. Animals often sensed danger before humans did. When the birds stopped singing, something usually wasn't right. The point man suddenly raised his fist. The entire patrol froze. No one spoke. The only sounds came from insects hidden beneath enormous leaves. Then, crack. One rifle shot. An American corporal collapsed instantly. The bullet had entered just above his shoulder. Sniper. Men dove behind trees. Some fired toward the general direction of the shot. Others searched desperately through the dense foliage. Nothing. No movement. No muzzle flash. Only silence. The invisible enemy had disappeared again. For nearly 20 minutes, the patrol remained pinned down. Anyone exposing even a shoulder risked another carefully aimed bullet. Several soldiers sprayed bursts into nearby trees. Branches shattered. Leaves rained onto the jungle floor. Still no target. Lieutenant George studied the terrain differently. Instead of searching everywhere, he searched for one thing: a firing position. If he were the Japanese sniper, where would he choose to hide? His eyes slowly examined every tree line, every elevated root system, every shadow. Then something caught his attention. Not movement, the absence of it. One cluster of leaves remained perfectly still despite a light breeze moving everything around it. Almost invisible. Almost impossible to notice. George slowly raised the Winchester. He didn't rush. Didn't guess. He waited. Nearly 30 seconds passed. Then, a tiny reflection. Sunlight glinting off glass or metal. That was enough. He squeezed the trigger. The powerful rifle echoed through the jungle. Silence followed. Then, a body fell from the branches nearly 30 feet above the ground. The patrol stared in disbelief. The sniper had been hiding in a tree the entire time. One shot. One kill. The joking stopped immediately. No one mentioned the mail-order rifle again that day. Instead, they asked a different question. How had he seen something none of the rest of them had? The answer had little to do with eyesight. It had everything to do with patience. And over the next 4 days, that patience would save dozens of American lives. September 17, 1944. Word traveled quickly through the American lines. The lieutenant with the civilian rifle had found a Japanese sniper that dozens of men couldn't even see. By breakfast, soldiers from neighboring platoons were already talking about him. That's the officer with the mail-order rifle. The one who dropped a sniper out of a tree. Some still sounded skeptical. Others were simply curious. John George ignored all of it. Experience had taught him a dangerous lesson. A sniper's first success often made him overconfident. The second could get him killed. The Japanese soldiers they were facing were professionals. If one sniper had been operating in that sector, there were almost certainly more. Much more. The dense jungle allowed them to work in pairs or even small teams. One fired, another observed. A third protected their escape route. American patrols rarely saw any of them. The Japanese had spent years mastering camouflage. Some wrapped fresh leaves around their helmets every morning. Others smeared mud across their uniforms to eliminate unnatural colors. Many constructed firing positions days before American troops ever arrived. Tiny openings between branches allowed a rifle barrel to protrude while hiding almost the entire shooter. To an untrained eye, the jungle looked empty. To an experienced sniper, it was filled with invisible firing positions. That afternoon, George's platoon received orders to escort engineers clearing a narrow trail through the jungle. It sounded like routine work. Routine work in the Pacific often proved deadly. The engineers carried explosives and heavy equipment. They moved slowly. Too slowly. Perfect targets. George volunteered to walk well ahead of the main column. Officially, he was scouting. Unofficially, he was hunting. Every few minutes he stopped completely, not because he had heard anything, because the jungle revealed its secrets only to those willing to remain perfectly still. Movement attracted the eye. Stillness exposed it. After nearly 40 minutes, he noticed something unusual. The birds. They had landed repeatedly on nearby branches. Except for one particular tree. Every bird approaching it suddenly changed direction. Animals often noticed what humans overlooked. George crouched behind a fallen log. His binoculars slowly swept upward. Nothing. Just vines, leaves, branches. Then, a shape. Not large enough to identify. Not clear enough to fire, but unnatural. Almost geometric. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. The jungle remained silent. Many soldiers would have concluded they had imagined it. George trusted patience. Eventually, a tiny movement betrayed the hidden sniper. Only a hand, barely visible. Adjusting the rifle, George raised the Winchester. The distance was well over 200 yards, far beyond what most men would attempt through dense jungle. He slowed his breathing. Half a breath in, half a breath out. The trigger broke cleanly. The rifle echoed through the trees. Several birds exploded into flight. Then, the hidden figure slumped forward. A Japanese sniper tumbled from the platform he had spent hours constructing. The engineers never even realized how close they had come to walking into an ambush. For George, however, that was only the beginning. The following morning brought heavy rain. Tropical storms transformed the jungle into a dripping maze. Water poured from every leaf. Visibility became even worse than before. Many officers believed sniper activity would decrease in such weather. They were wrong. Rain concealed movement, muted footsteps, masked rifle reports. It created ideal conditions for experienced marksmen. The patrol advanced carefully through knee-deep mud. Suddenly, another shot. An American radio operator spun sideways before collapsing. The radio smashed against a tree trunk. The patrol scattered instantly. Machine guns fired blindly into the vegetation. George remained motionless. Instead of searching where the bullet had come from, he searched where the sniper expected everyone else to look. Japanese marksmen frequently changed firing positions after every shot. The first location often served as a distraction. The second delivered the fatal blow. George studied the surrounding terrain. If he wanted to cover the first firing point, where would he hide? His answer came almost immediately. A narrow ridge overlooking both the patrol and the original sniper position. He aimed toward the ridge. Nothing. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, a faint ripple moved through the wet leaves. Not caused by wind, not caused by rain. Someone crawling. George fired instinctively. A muffled cry echoed across the jungle. The crawling stopped forever. The patrol cautiously advanced. This time they discovered two carefully prepared sniper positions. One empty. One occupied by the man George had just killed. The Japanese had planned a deadly crossfire. It never happened. That evening, even the veterans approached George with respect. No one mentioned sporting rifles anymore. Instead, they asked questions. What are you looking for? How do you know where they'll hide? George answered honestly. I don't. I just ask myself where I'd hide. It sounded simple. In reality, it required years of observation. The third day proved even worse. American forces pushed deeper into heavily defended jungle. Japanese resistance stiffened. Mortars began falling with disturbing accuracy. Every halt became dangerous. Every clearing looked suspicious. Late that afternoon, an exhausted squad requested permission to rest beside a small stream. George refused. The location bothered him. Water attracted thirsty soldiers, which meant it also attracted snipers. The squad moved another 100 yards instead. Only minutes later, a rifle shot rang out from the stream they had almost occupied. The bullet struck an empty log. Had they remained there, someone would almost certainly have died. George immediately located the approximate firing direction. The sniper had chosen an exceptionally clever position. Instead of climbing a tree, he had concealed himself beneath tangled roots hanging over the riverbank. The opening measured barely 18 inches high, almost invisible. George crawled through thick mud until he reached a fallen palm. Using its trunk for support, he carefully lined up the shot. The Japanese sniper finally noticed him. Both men saw each other almost simultaneously. For a fraction of a second, neither moved. Then both rifles fired. At exactly the same moment, George felt bark explode inches from his face. His own bullet struck first. The sniper collapsed backward into the shallow water. When American soldiers later examined the position, they found George's hat pierced cleanly by a splinter thrown from the tree. Had he hesitated even half a second, the story might have ended there. By the evening of the third day, whispers spread through the regiment. Some officers requested George accompany their patrols. Others simply wanted him nearby. Not because he possessed supernatural eyesight, because he remained calm when everyone else panicked. Confidence can be contagious in combat. So can fear. George gave his men the first. The Japanese intended to give them the second. Neither side knew that the most dangerous day of all would arrive with the next sunrise. September 20th, 1944. Rain had fallen throughout most of the night, leaving the jungle soaked and strangely quiet. Lieutenant John George had slept for barely 2 hours. The previous 3 days had been a relentless cycle of patrols, ambushes, sniper hunts, and exhausting marches through some of the harshest terrain in the Pacific. By now, no one in the platoon joked about his Winchester Model 70. The nickname mail-order rifle had quietly disappeared. Instead, whenever the patrol prepared to move, the soldiers instinctively looked toward George. If he stopped, everyone stopped. If he crouched, everyone crouched. Combat had transformed skepticism into trust, and trust was often the difference between life and death. That morning, intelligence officers reported increased Japanese sniper activity throughout the sector. Several patrols had already suffered casualties before noon. One company had lost 2 officers. Another had spent nearly 6 hours pinned down by only 3 concealed marksmen. The Japanese understood something many armies often overlooked. A single skilled sniper could delay an entire battalion. He could stop supply convoys, slow assaults, destroy morale, force commanders to commit dozens of men simply to eliminate one hidden rifle. It was an incredibly efficient weapon. George also understood that, which was why he refused to rush. The patrol moved slowly along a narrow jungle ridge overlooking a deep ravine. Visibility remained poor despite the morning light. Towering palm trees blocked the sun. Thick vines formed natural walls between sections of forest. Even experienced scouts found navigation difficult. The point man suddenly froze. George immediately saw why. Ahead, a helmet rested beside a tree. American. At least it appeared to be. One young private whispered, "Someone's been hit." Another started moving toward it. George quietly grabbed his sleeve. "Wait." The private looked confused. The helmet seemed ordinary, almost abandoned. George studied the scene carefully. Nothing about it felt natural. The helmet lay too neatly. There was no body nearby. No blood. No equipment scattered across the ground. It looked placed. Deliberately, he slowly raised his binoculars. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Several soldiers shifted impatiently. Then, a tiny glimmer appeared beneath a cluster of vines overlooking the helmet. Not sunlight. Glass. Someone was watching the bait. George whispered for everyone to remain absolutely still. He adjusted the Winchester carefully against the trunk of a fallen tree. The distance exceeded 300 yards. The sniper remained almost completely hidden. Only part of his face appeared behind carefully woven vegetation. George waited, 5, 10, 15 seconds. The Japanese sniper believed his trap had worked. Eventually, another American would approach the abandoned helmet. That would be the moment to fire. Instead, George squeezed the trigger. The powerful rifle cracked through the jungle. The concealed figure disappeared instantly. A few moments later, scouts cautiously advanced.
Get them out route. Quit abroad town rate finger David Conveyanci. Gretz. You're happy. Probably days in Bible today. Quarter and Van Kennis will bought a pigeon.
Hidden beneath layers of leaves, they found one of the most elaborate sniper positions any of them had ever seen. The abandoned helmet had been nothing more than bait. Several soldiers stared silently at the clever trap. One finally turned toward George. "I would have walked right into that." George nodded. So would most people. As the patrol continued, word spread through nearby units. Another sniper eliminated. Another ambush avoided. By now, George's growing reputation had reached battalion headquarters. Several officers requested that he inspect sectors where sniper activity remained unusually high. It wasn't because they believed he possessed extraordinary eyesight. It was because he thought differently. While others searched for enemy soldiers, George searched for opportunities. Where would a patient marksman choose to hide? Where could he observe movement without exposing himself? Which tree offered the widest field of fire? Which ridge overlooked the only usable trail? He solved sniper problems like puzzles. The Japanese did exactly the same. That afternoon brought the final confrontation. A supply convoy had been halted near a narrow river crossing. 3 separate sniper attacks had already forced drivers to abandon their vehicles. Every attempt to recover them ended with another burst of rifle fire. No one had seen the shooter. George arrived shortly before sunset. Instead of examining the trucks, he examined the terrain surrounding them. The road curved sharply before crossing the river. Large boulders lined one side. Dense jungle covered the other. Most soldiers concentrated on the trees overlooking the vehicles. George ignored them completely. He walked nearly 200 yards downstream, then stopped. The river made a slight bend there. Anyone lying beneath the overhanging bank could observe the crossing without ever exposing himself to men searching from the road. It was exactly the kind of position George himself would have selected. He crawled forward inch by inch. Mud soaked his uniform. Mosquitoes buzzed around his face. Still, he remained perfectly silent. At last, he saw it. The faint outline of a rifle barrel protruding from beneath tangled roots. The Japanese sniper hadn't noticed him, not yet. George carefully settled behind a log. His breathing slowed. The jungle became completely silent. Then the sniper shifted slightly. Just enough. One shot echoed across the river. The hidden rifle disappeared. The convoy resumed moving less than an hour later. When engineers searched the position, they discovered food supplies, spare ammunition, camouflage netting, and evidence that the sniper had occupied the location for several days. He had been waiting patiently for American traffic. George had simply arrived first. By the end of the 4th day, American intelligence credited his actions with eliminating or directly contributing to the elimination of numerous Japanese sniper positions during continuous jungle operations. Later retellings often summarized the period with the memorable phrase that he had accounted for 11 snipers in 4 days. While the exact number cannot be verified with certainty from surviving records, there is no doubt that his marksmanship and fieldcraft repeatedly protected American patrols and saved lives. The soldiers remembered something even more important than the number. Not one of those sniper duels had been won through luck. Every victory resulted from patience, observation, discipline. Years later, John George wrote about those experiences in his remarkable book, Shots Fired in Anger. Unlike many wartime memoirs that focused on glory, his writings emphasized practical lessons. He explained how experienced soldiers learned to read terrain, how camouflage worked, why patience defeated panic. Many modern military instructors still consider his observations among the finest ever written about small unit combat. When the war finally ended, countless rifles returned home with American veterans. Most were government-issued weapons. A few became museum pieces. But one civilian sporting rifle had earned a place in military history. The rifle that some soldiers had mocked as nothing more than a mail-order hunting gun. The rifle they believed had no place on a battlefield. It had never been designed specifically for war. Yet, in the hands of a disciplined marksman, it repeatedly outperformed expectations. The rifle itself was never extraordinary. Thousands of Americans owned Winchester Model 70s. What made the difference was the man behind the trigger. John George understood something that every experienced soldier eventually learns. A weapon is only a tool. Its true value depends on the judgment, patience, and discipline of the person using it. Many soldiers carried faster rifles. Some carried more ammunition. Others possessed greater firepower. But none of those advantages mattered if they fired at the wrong target. George waited, observed, thought. Only then did he squeeze the trigger. That habit probably saved more American lives than any single piece of equipment ever could. History often celebrates famous generals, decorated aces, and legendary commanders. But wars are also shaped by quieter men. Men who rarely appeared in newspaper headlines. Men who walked silently through the jungle while everyone else searched in the wrong direction. John George was one of those men. His fellow soldiers first remembered him because of a rifle they thought belonged in a hunting lodge. They remembered him forever because that same rifle kept bringing them home alive. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Never underestimate a soldier because his equipment looks different. Sometimes, the weapon everyone laughs at becomes the one everyone hopes is standing beside them when the shooting starts.